To hell with the jury, to hell with the judge, and to hell with the smug son of a bitch at the prosecutor's table who looked like he'd just won the lottery. 70 years old, and this is how it ends. Not in a warm bed surrounded by family, but in a courtroom that smelled of cheap polish and stale justice, about to be swallowed whole by the system. Guilty on all counts. The foreman's words didn't echo. They were a physical blow, a fist of sound that slammed the air from Ramona Hayes's lungs. Her knuckles, gnarled from a lifetime of hard work, turned bone white against the splintered wood of the defendant's table. 70 years on this earth, and she was going to die in a concrete box for a murder she didn't commit, a murder of a man who was already a ghost. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge droned on, his voice a monotonous buzzsaw cutting through her future. "You have been found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Life. Without parole. The words were alien, absurd. She'd outlived her husband, outlived her friends, outlived the very neighborhood she'd grown up in. But she would not outlive this sentence. Ramona's world tilted, the faces in the gallery blurring into a watercolor of pity and morbid curiosity. Her knees gave way, and the icy reality of it all washed over her. No more sunshine on her face. No more tending to the stubborn tomato plants in her backyard. No more sitting on her porch, watching the neighborhood kids play, their laughter a melody that soothed her old bones. This was it. The end of everything. "This is a goddamn sham." Her public defender, a kid barely old enough to rent a car, was shouting, but his voice was a gnat in a hurricane. Ramona barely registered it. The prosecutor, a man with the hungry eyes of a wolf, was already packing his leather briefcase, the snap of the latches like the cocking of a gun. Efficient, satisfied, done. Somewhere behind her, she heard her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, weeping. "She didn't do it," the woman sobbed. "Mona wouldn't hurt a fly." But the jury hadn't seen the woman who baked cookies for the entire block every Christmas. They hadn't seen the woman who'd taken in stray cats and stray kids with the same fierce, unconditional love. They saw a poor, old black woman from the wrong side of Port Meridian and a mountain of evidence that screamed her guilt. Her fingerprints, they said, were on the murder weapon. Her bank account, they said, was suddenly flooded with dirty money. Security footage, they claimed, put her at the scene of the crime. Lies, all of it, a perfectly constructed cage of lies, and she'd walked right into it. As a bailiff, his face etched with a discomfort that offered no comfort at all, approached with a set of gleaming steel handcuffs, Ramona's mind slipped its leash. It ran back through the years to a stormy night almost 3 decades ago. A night when 3 terrified boys with nowhere else to go had changed her life forever. A time when being poor still meant you owned your own soul. A time when kindness wasn't a calculation, but an instinct. "Ma'am, I need you to stand and place your hands behind your back." The bailiff's voice was softer than she expected. Even he seemed to smell the rot in this verdict. But the machine was in motion, and she was just another piece of grist for its gears. "Hold on a goddamn minute!" The voice boomed from the back of the courtroom, a deep, commanding sound that vibrated in the marble floors. It wasn't a request. It was a wrecking ball. Heads snapped around. The restless murmur of the gallery died instantly. Ramona twisted in her seat. Her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. Down the center aisle strode a man who owned the very air he moved through. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her house, and he carried himself with an intensity that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. 2 other men followed in his wake, one with prematurely graying hair and the kind eyes of a healer. the other younger, radiating a quiet, coiled energy. The prosecutor's face soured. Your Honor, this proceeding is concluded. The judge leaned forward, his judicial mask slipping to reveal naked curiosity. And who exactly are you gentlemen? The man in the lead stopped directly behind Ramona's chair. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. We're her sons. The lie was so audacious, so impossible, that for a second Ramona thought she was hallucinating. But then the man's gaze met hers in the reflection of the polished table, and her heart seized in her chest. Those eyes, dark, serious, and filled with a fire she hadn't seen in 28 years. The name was a ghost on her lips, a whispered prayer. Jules? The man's iron composure fractured. A tremor ran through his jaw. Hey, Mama Mona. The courtroom, already silent, somehow became quieter. The judge adjusted his glasses, peering down from his perch like a hawk spotting something inexplicable. I'm sorry, son. Did you just refer to the defendant as your mother? In every way that matters, Your Honor, the second man said, stepping forward. He placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the prosecutor's table. My name is Dr. Mateo Flores. I'm the chief of trauma surgery at Meridian General. He gestured to the other two. This is my brother, Leo Sterling, founder and CEO of Sentinel Cybersecurity. And this is our brother, Julian Vance, senior partner at the Vance Coalition for Civil Rights. Ramona's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob finally breaking free. Her boys, her 3 scrawny, terrified boys who used to fight over the last piece of cornbread at her tiny kitchen table. They stood before her now, titans of their worlds, radiating power and success. But all she could see were the haunted children they used to be. The prosecutor let out a derisive snort. Your Honor, this is a circus. The defendant has been sentenced. The case is closed. The defendant was framed. Julian's voice sliced through the air, sharp and lethal as a scalpel. And we have the proof. Hey there, my friend. I hope this story has grabbed you by the throat, because we are just getting started. Drop a comment right now and let me know how you're feeling, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Some of the tales I have are a little too dark, a little too close to the bone to share on this platform. I save those for my inner circle, my email list. If you want a front row seat to the stuff I can't show here, plus some life lessons and other surprises, the link is waiting for you in the description. Join us. Judge Harrison stared down at the 3 men, his expression shifting from irritation to intense fascination. In 40 years on the bench, he'd seen every kind of courtroom drama imaginable. This was new. Mr. Vance, he said slowly, are you asserting you have new evidence that was not presented during the trial? Evidence that was deliberately and systematically buried, Your Honor, Julian countered, his voice ringing with conviction. Evidence that proves my mother, the word caught in his throat for a fraction of a second, is innocent, and more than that, evidence that will expose the real monster who committed these crimes and orchestrated this entire charade. The world swam in Ramona's vision. This couldn't be real. Her boys, her precious boys who she hadn't laid eyes on in 15 years, had just walked back into her life at the exact moment the world was ending. Leo Sterling, the quiet one, the genius, stepped forward. His voice, though soft, commanded the room's absolute attention. Your Honor, for the past 18 months, we have dedicated the full resources of my company to investigating this case from the ground up. What we uncovered will not just shock this court, it will rock this city to its foundations. The real killer is sitting in this courtroom right now. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The prosecutor froze, his face losing all color, becoming a waxy, sallow mask. Matteo, the doctor, pulled out a tablet, his surgeon's hands rock steady despite the storm of emotion in his eyes. We have encrypted financial records, sworn affidavits from witnesses who were threatened into silence, and irrefutable forensic evidence that was suppressed. Our mother didn't just give 3 homeless kids a place to sleep, Your Honor. She saved our lives. Now, it's our turn to save hers. The judge looked from the 3 powerful men to Ramona, who sat in stunned, tearful silence. These were her boys, the same boys who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, their small bodies trembling. The same boys who'd sworn to her, with all the solemnity of childhood oaths, that they'd make something of themselves one day. The same boys she thought had forgotten her. Your Honor. Julian's voice swelled, gaining strength and righteous fury. We request an immediate stay of sentencing pending an emergency evidentiary hearing. We will prove not only that our mother is innocent, but that she is the victim of a conspiracy so vast and so vile it will make your blood run cold. Chorsat. The prosecutor shot to his feet, sputtering. This is preposterous. The case is closed. These men have no standing. Don't they? Judge Harrison's voice was like gravel. He studied Julian's face, a mask of unshakable resolve, then looked at Ramona. He saw her differently now. Not as a convicted murderer, but as the woman who had somehow forged these 3 extraordinary men. Mr. Vance, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to convince me that I should upend a lawful conviction and delay this sentence. Julian allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. It was the same crooked smile he'd had as a 12-year-old, promising he'd fix her leaky faucet. With all due respect, Your Honor, we only need 1. As he opened his briefcase, Ramona saw a photograph tucked inside the lid. It was old, faded, and creased. A picture of her and 3 young boys on her front porch, all of them grinning like they didn't have a damn thing to worry about in the world. Despite the frayed clothes and the peeling paint, she'd kept them safe. She'd been their shield. Now, impossibly, they were here to be hers. But as Julian prepared to speak, Ramona noticed something that sent a shard of ice through her veins. In the back of the courtroom, half hidden behind a marble pillar, stood a figure. A silhouette she recognized from the deepest, darkest corners of her nightmares. Someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who was supposed to be dead. The same someone who had started this entire nightmare 28 years ago, when 3 homeless boys first knocked on her door, running from a danger she had never fully understood. The past wasn't buried, after all. It had just been waiting. And now, it was coming for all of them. 28 years. Earlier. The banging on Ramona Hayes's door came just before 3 a.m., a frantic, desperate drumming that sounded like knuckles against a coffin lid. She'd been awake, of course. She was always awake these nights, staring at the water stains on the ceiling of her little 2-bedroom house. The silence screaming with the absence of her husband, Marcus. Wondering how in God's name she was going to make the mortgage payment on a school custodian's salary. Please, please, somebody help us! The voice was a child's, thin and stretched with terror. Ramona pulled on her worn chenille robe and padded to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She peered through the peephole, her breath catching in her throat. 3 boys stood huddled on her porch, their faces pale in the moonlight. The oldest looked to be about 12, his arms wrapped protectively around 2 smaller ones. They were drenched from the autumn rain, shivering violently, and the oldest had a fresh, angry gash across his cheek. Every instinct screamed at her. Don't open that door. Don't get involved. Trouble has come knocking. She opened the door. Lord have mercy, she breathed, taking in their tattered clothes, their wide, haunted eyes, the way they flinched back as if expecting a blow. What happened to you babies? The oldest boy, rail-thin but with a spine of steel, positioned himself in front of the others. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. Your light was on. We just don't have anywhere else to go. Where are your folks? The boy's jaw hardened into a line of granite. Gone. His voice was flat, empty. And the man who was supposed to be watching us? We can't go back, not ever. Something in that small, broken voice resonated deep in Ramona's soul. She'd heard that tone before. She'd heard it in her own voice at age 10, the day her father didn't come home from the mill. It was the sound of a childhood ending. Well, you can't stand out here all night, she said, her voice rougher than she intended. Get inside before you catch your death. She stepped back. I'll put on some hot chocolate. The youngest, a boy with eyes the color of a stormy sky, who couldn't have been more than 7, looked up at her. You gonna call the cops? Do you want me to? The middle boy, maybe 9 years old, with a gentle face and an old man's sorrow in his eyes, shook his head so violently his wet hair flung droplets across the floor. They won't believe us. They never believe kids like us. Kids like us. Ramona had been a kid like that, too. Unseen, unheard, unbelievable. In her tiny kitchen, they huddled around the formica table like shipwreck survivors, watching her every move as she heated milk on the stove. They were unnaturally still, their hands in their laps, their posture rigid with exhaustion and fear. They had manners, but they also had scars, both the kind you could see and the kind you couldn't. What are your names? She asked, her back to them as she stirred cocoa powder into the steaming mugs. I'm Julian, the oldest said. This is Mateo, and that's Leo. Julian, Mateo, and Leo, she repeated, setting the mugs before them. The smell of chocolate filled the small space. I'm Mrs. Hayes, but you can call me Mona. Julian wrapped his slender fingers around the warm mug, like it was a lifeline. Miss Mona, we won't be a bother. We just need to rest for a bit. Then we'll be on our way. On your way where exactly? The 3 boys exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. It was Mateo, the quiet one, who finally spoke, his voice a near whisper. We were with our guardian, a man named Vincent Ror, after our folks died in a fire. He paused, swallowing hard. But Vince, he had friends, business associates. They said we could earn our keep, make some real money. Ramona's blood turned to ice water. She'd heard the whispers on the street, the stories that parents told their children to scare them into coming home before dark. What kind of work, baby? Leo, the youngest, pressed his face into Julian's side, his small body trembling. Julian's face, so young, became a mask of cold fury that no 12-year-old should ever have to wear. The kind of work that leaves bruises, the kind that makes you want to crawl out of your own skin. The spoon fell from Ramona's hand, clattering on the linoleum. These babies, these precious, innocent babies had been... We ran tonight, Julian continued, his voice steady despite the horror he was describing. Vince is gonna be pissed. He told us if we ever tried to run, he'd hunt us down and drag us back. Said no one would ever believe a bunch of street kids over a respectable businessman like him. Foster kids. Orphans. Ramona knew the system. She knew how easily children could fall through the cracks, becoming invisible, expendable. Property. You're safe here, she heard herself say, the words a promise she had no idea how she would keep. Nobody is going to hurt you while you're under my roof. It was a vow that would detonate all their lives. Over the next few days, the story came out in jagged, painful pieces. A network of powerful men who treated children like currency. And Julian, her brave, fierce Julian, who had planned their escape for months, waiting for the one night Vince and his cronies were distracted by a deal gone bad. "We're gonna get older," Julian told her one night, his eyes blazing with a desperate fire as he helped her wash the dishes. "We're gonna get strong, and then we're gonna burn his whole world to the ground." Ramona had looked at this broken, beautiful boy, at his fierce loyalty to his brothers, and she made a decision that defied all logic and reason. "You don't have to wait until you're strong," she told him. "You already saved Mateo and Leo. Now let me save the three of you." But on the fourth morning, the devil came to collect. Ramona woke to the smell of expensive cologne and found Vincent Ror standing in her living room. He was exactly as the boys had described, tall, impeccably dressed, with pale, lifeless eyes that seemed to look right through you. Two men, built like brick shithouses, flanked him. The boys were nowhere in sight. "Mrs. Hayes," Vince said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble, "I do believe you have something that belongs to me." "These boys don't belong to anyone," Ramona said, her voice shaking but defiant. Vince smiled, a thin reptilian stretching of his lips. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. You see, I am their legal guardian. I have the court orders, the custody papers, the whole 9 yards. He nodded to one of his goons, who produced a sheaf of official-looking documents. They were all there, all legitimate, all lies. "Those boys are part of a very exclusive apprenticeship program," Vince continued, strolling around her small living room, touching her meager possessions as if he owned them. "They receive vocational training. In return, I provide for their every need. It's a philanthropic endeavor, really." "What you're doing is an abomination," Ramona spat, her fear giving way to a cold, hard rage. "What I'm doing is business," Vince corrected, his tone never changing. He stopped in front of a photo of her and Marcus on their wedding day. "Your husband was a good man. A tragedy, that cancer. The medical bills must have been, astronomical." The threat was as clear as the glass in the picture frame. He knew her pressure points. He knew where to squeeze. "I'm going to make you an offer, Mrs. Hayes. A golden opportunity. You give me my boys back, and I'll give you something to ease your financial burdens." He reached into his tailored suit and pulled out a thick envelope. $50,000, cash. More money than you'll see in 10 years of mopping floors. Ramona stared at the envelope. $50,000. It was a lifeline. It was a way out. It was freedom from the crushing weight of debt that Marcus had left behind. All she had to do was sacrifice 3 children she barely knew. "And if I say no?" Vince's smile widened. "Then those boys will learn a very painful lesson about the consequences of disobedience. And you, Mrs. Hayes, will learn an equally painful lesson about the folly of interfering in matters that are far above your pay grade." From the corner of her eye, she saw him. Julian, hiding in the hallway, his face a mask of terror and a terrible, heart-breaking resignation. He expected her to take the money. The world had taught him that everyone had a price. Ramona Hayes looked at the envelope, thought about her empty bank account, her lonely future, and the 3 broken boys huddled in her back bedroom. She made the choice that would define the rest of her life. She took the envelope from his hand. She felt Julian's spirit break. Then she ripped it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "Get the hell out of my house," she said, her voice quiet but harder than any stone. "And don't you ever come back." Vince's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something truly evil ignited in his dead eyes. "That was a remarkably poor decision, Mrs. Hayes. A very poor decision indeed." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "This isn't over. I always collect on my investments. Always." The moment the door clicked shut, Julian emerged, his brothers trailing behind him. His face was a canvas of disbelief and dawning hope. You ripped it up," he whispered. "All that money. For us." Ramona knelt, pulling him into an embrace that was fierce and absolute. "Baby, there isn't enough money in the whole damn world to buy your souls." And for the first time since their parents died, Julian Vance, the boy who would one day become one of the nation's most formidable civil rights attorneys, wept. But Vincent Ror was a man of his word. He always collected. Always. 6 years later. "Mama Mona, you're going to be late for your own graduation." Julian's voice, now a deep baritone, echoed from the kitchen. Ramona stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the cap and gown she'd never dreamed she'd wear. 54 years old and a college graduate. The boys had insisted. They'd pooled the money from their part-time jobs. Julian at a law library, Mateo as an orderly at the clinic, Leo running a computer repair business out of the garage, to throw her a party. Her boys, 18-year-old Julian with a full ride to Northwestern pre-law, 16-year-old Mateo, already acing college-level biology courses, and 14-year-old Leo, a quiet prodigy who'd built his own encrypted network from scrap parts. They were her miracles. The phone rang. In 2003, it was still a landline, mounted on the kitchen wall. Mateo answered, his mouth full of the burnt pancakes Julian had tried to make. "Hayes residence. Yes, this is he." His face changed. The smile vanished, replaced by a familiar, hunted look. I think you have the wrong number." He slammed the phone down. "Who was that, baby?" Mona asked, coming into the kitchen. "Nobody. Wrong number." But his hands were shaking. The phone rang again. This time Julian snatched it. "Hello? I told you not to call here again. We don't want anything to do with you." He slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic cracked. "Boys." Ramona's voice was calm, but it carried the unshakable authority of 6 years of motherhood. "Tell me what's happening. Now." It was Leo who spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "It's him, Mama, it's Vince. He found us." The spatula fell from Mona's hand. 6 years. 6 years of peace, of building a home, of believing the monster had forgotten them. The phone rang a third time. She answered it. "Mrs. Hayes." The voice was the same. Smooth, cold, terrifying. "It's been too long. The boys are growing into fine young men, I see. It's time for them to come home, to fulfill their obligations." "Stay away from my family." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Your family? Mrs. Hayes, that's where you're mistaken. According to the state, they are still my wards, and I've been a very patient guardian, but my patience is wearing thin." He then laid out his trap. The trust fund their parents had left, which he had systematically plundered. The allegations he was prepared to make against her, a poor custodian living far above her means, financing her education, and 3 boys on a meager salary. He had been watching them for years, building his case, waiting for the perfect moment to tighten the noose. "You have 48 hours to convince them to return to me," Vince said, his voice dropping to a silken threat. "After that, I stop being reasonable. And I want you to understand, Mona. This was never just about the boys. You made it personal when you tore up my money. One way or another, you are going to pay for that insult. The only question is whether you drag those boys down with you." The line went dead. Mona stood frozen, the receiver humming in her hand. Outside, a black sedan was parked across the street, its engine idling. Vince was inside. He raised a hand in a mocking wave, then pointed to his watch. 48 hours. The countdown had begun. That night, Mona made her choice. She would not let him destroy their futures. She would sacrifice herself. She met Vince at the old shipping pier, a place where deals were made and bodies disappeared. She offered herself in exchange for their freedom. Vince laughed. He didn't want her. He wanted his property. But it was a trap. The boys, disobeying her for the first time in their lives, followed her. The confrontation was a blur of shouting, rain, and violence. Vince's men were ruthless. In the chaos, Vince pulled a gun. He aimed it at Julian. Mona didn't think. She moved. The bullet ripped through her side, the force of it throwing her against a stack of rusty barrels. The last thing she saw before she blacked out was the terrified faces of her boys as Vince's men dragged them away. The last thing she heard was Vince's voice, whispering in her ear. "I told you I always collect." Except that's not what happened. That was the story the police were told, the story that sent her to prison for kidnapping and assault. The real story was worse. In the struggle, one of Vince's men went down, a knife in his ribs. Vince, seeing his opportunity, shot Ramona himself, planted the knife in her hand, and called the police, claiming she'd gone insane, and her boys, her brave, terrified boys. They ran, because she made them. With her dying breath, she'd begged them to run, to disappear, to live. It was her final act of love, a sacrifice that would cost them all 22 years. We are now deep in the belly of the beast, and the story is about to take a turn so dark you might need a flashlight. This is your mid-story check-in. If your heart is pounding and you need to know what happens next, prove it. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you're notified when the next chapter drops. Remember that private email list I mentioned? This is where stories like this go when they get too real for YouTube. The link is in the description. Trust me, you want to be on that list. 15 years after the pier. The letter, postmarked from Blackgate Penitentiary, arrived on a Tuesday. Julian Vance, now 40, and one of the most respected and feared civil rights attorneys in the country, opened it with hands that felt like clumsy blocks of ice. "My dearest Jules, I don't know if this will ever find you. I don't even know if you're still using that name. But I had to try. Tomorrow is the 15th anniversary of that night. 15 years since I saw your face. I'm in prison, baby. I have been since that night. Vince's story stuck. They said I tried to kill him. I took the plea deal to keep you boys off the witness stand, to keep you safe. But something has changed. Vince Ror is getting out. Compassionate release. They say he's a changed man. Men like him don't change, Jules. They just get smarter. He will come for you, all three of you. He will never stop until he's collected what he believes is his. Be careful. Be smart. But most of all, be alive. I love you forever. Mama Mona." 2 days later, 3 men who were strangers to the world but brothers to each other met in a private room in a dusty Kansas steakhouse. Dr. Mateo Flores, his surgeon's hands still and steady, but his eyes filled with a storm of emotion. Leo Sterling, a tech billionaire who lived behind a firewall of paranoia and wealth, his face pale and drawn. And Julian. "He's not just getting out," Leo said, his voice flat. He pushed a tablet across the table. "He's dead." The screen showed a news article. Philanthropist Vincent Ror found murdered. Evidence points to an organized hit. "And guess who their only suspect is?" Mateo said, his voice laced with acid. Julian already knew. "Her. They're claiming she orchestrated it from inside Blackgate," Leo confirmed, "to stop him from testifying at a parole hearing she supposedly requested." "It's the perfect trap," Julian breathed, the chilling logic of it all falling into place. He fakes his own death and frames her for the murder. He gets to disappear with a new identity and a clean slate, and she dies in prison for a crime that never even happened. "It's his checkmate," Mateo agreed. "He's finally destroying her, and there's nothing we can do." "The hell there isn't," Julian snarled, his grief and guilt solidifying into a cold, hard diamond of rage. He may have spent the last 15 years planning her destruction, but we've spent the last 15 years getting ready for him. It's time to go to war. But the war had already begun, and they were walking into an ambush. A new player had entered the game, someone far more dangerous than Vince Ror, someone who had been waiting in the shadows for a very long time. That night, an encrypted message appeared on Leo's laptop. "Your mother's trial is a formality. She will be convicted. If you want to see her alive again, be at the pier. Midnight. 28 years to the day. Come alone, or she dies screaming. An old friend who never forgot." "The pier," Matteo whispered, the words tasting like ash. "It's a trap," Leo stated, his fingers already flying across the keyboard, trying to trace the untraceable signal. "Of course it's a trap," Julian said, his eyes blazing. "But it's the only move we have left. We're going back to where it all began, and this time we're not running." Midnight at the Port Meridian Pier was a symphony of decay. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and old ghosts. The man who stepped out of the shadows was not Vince Ror. He was taller, leaner, with the calm, steady hands of a surgeon and the dead, empty eyes of a shark. "You're wondering who I am," the man said, his voice a cultured, academic monotone. "My name is Silas Croft, and for the last 2 decades I have been Vincent Ror. I killed the original Vince years ago. He was a clumsy, sentimental fool. I, on the other hand, am an artist." He explained everything with a chilling, detached pride. He had been Vince's silent partner, the true architect of their network. After the pier incident, he'd eliminated Vince and taken over, refining the operation. And for 28 years, he had been their secret benefactor. The anonymous scholarship that sent Matteo to medical school, the seed money from a shell corporation that launched Leo's company, the leaked evidence that had won Julian his first landmark case. "I have been your guardian angel," Silas purred. "I needed you to become powerful, successful, respected. I needed you to be worthy adversaries for my masterpiece of revenge." "Revenge for what?" Julian demanded. "For costing me my life's work, and for proving that a sentimental notion like love could triumph over a primal force like fear. I am here to correct that cosmic imbalance. I am here to prove that evil, when properly applied, always wins." He revealed his final gambit. Hidden in the shipping containers around them were 3 hostages. Detective Frank Miller, the lead investigator on Mona's case, a little girl abducted for leverage, and Anya Petrova, the grown sister of another boy Vince had destroyed years ago, a woman who had been Silas's prisoner and enforcer for over a decade. "Here is your choice," Silas said, a gleam of madness in his eyes. "You can walk away now. Disappear. Let them all die. And your mother will die in prison, believing the sons she sacrificed everything for were selfish cowards. Or you can play the hero, die in a blaze of meaningless glory, and your mother will die in prison, believing the sons she sacrificed everything for were reckless fools who threw their lives away. Either way, her love is proven to be a poison. Either way, I win." It was the perfect, inescapable trap. Every choice led to ruin. "There's a third option," Leo said quietly, his eyes never leaving Silas's face. "Is there?" Silas chuckled. "We end you," Matteo said, his voice a low growl. "You can try," Silas said, and as if on cue, a dozen armed men emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the 3 brothers. "But as I said, I am an artist, and this is my masterpiece." But Silas had made one critical, fatal error. He had studied them for 28 years, but he had only seen them as pawns, as instruments of his revenge. He never understood what Ramona Hayes had forged them into. He never understood the power of a family built in the crucible of shared trauma. "You were broadcasting," Leo said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Silas froze. "What?" "The encrypted message you sent us," Leo explained. "I couldn't trace it, but I could hijack it. I piggybacked my own signal onto yours. Every word you've said tonight, your grand confession, has been live-streamed directly to every law enforcement agency on the eastern seaboard." The armed men hesitated, their confidence evaporating as the wail of distant sirens began to grow. "And you made another mistake," Julian added. "You assumed Anya Petrova was your prisoner, but you underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose is capable of." From behind a shipping container, Anya Petrova stepped out. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, her face a mask of cold, hard fury. And she was holding a detonator. "Hello, Silas," she said. "You took my brother. You took my life. Tonight I'm taking it all back." Silas stared at her, his perfect plan crumbling around him. You were supposed to be broken." "You broke me into a weapon," Anya snarled, "and you aimed me at the wrong people." As SWAT teams swarmed the pier, Silas Croft, the meticulous artist of revenge, was taken into custody, screaming and raving like a madman. It was over. They had won. But the real war was just beginning. Because Silas wasn't the mastermind, he was just another pawn, and Anya Petrova wasn't their savior. She was their executioner. The call came as the sun was rising, a distorted voice on a burner phone. Anya. She had Mona. She had rigged the records facility where Mona was being held with enough explosives to level a city block. "Silas was a fool," her voice crackled. "He wanted to teach you a lesson. I just want you to burn." Her demand was simple. The three brothers were to walk into the police station and confess to the murder of Vincent Ror and the conspiracy against Silas Croft. They would take the fall, go to prison for life, and Mona would go free. "You have 1 hour," Anya said. 1 hour to prove your mother's love was worth it. 1 hour to sacrifice yourselves for her, just as she did for you. Tick-tock, boys." The line went dead. The brothers stood in the cold morning light, facing a choice more impossible than any Silas had dreamed of. Destroy their own lives to save their mother's, or let her die and live with the shame. "It's not a choice," Mateo said, his voice thick with emotion. "We do what she taught us to do," Leo agreed. "We save our family," Julian finished, "no matter the cost." But Ramona Hayes had taught them something else, too. She had taught them that love wasn't about sacrifice, it was about salvation. And she was about to save them all one last time. Inside the records facility, Mona was not a helpless victim. She had been talking to her guard, a young man named Caleb, who was clearly in over his head. She spoke to him not as a prisoner, but as a mother. She told him about his family, about the choices that define a man, about the difference between loyalty and love. When Anya's countdown reached its final minutes, and the brothers were preparing to walk into the police station, Caleb made his choice. He deactivated the primary detonator. It wasn't enough to stop the bombs, but it was enough to buy them time. The brothers, alerted by Leo's frantic hacking, stormed the facility. It wasn't a battle of bullets and brawn. It was a battle of wills. Julian, using his knowledge of the law and his gift for persuasion, turned Anya's own men against her, offering them deals and a path to redemption. Mateo, using his medical knowledge, created a chemical diversion that incapacitated half of her team without firing a shot. And Leo, the digital ghost, locked down the building, turning Anya's fortress into her prison. The final confrontation took place in the basement, surrounded by a web of wires and explosives. Anya stood with the final detonator in her hand, her face a tragic mask of grief and rage, and Mona stood before her, not as a hostage, but as a shield. "It's over, baby," Mona said, her voice filled with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "It's time to stop fighting." "He died because of you," Anya screamed, tears streaming down her face. "My brother died because you gave him hope." "No," Mona said, taking a step closer. "He died because a cruel world broke him. But his love for you, and your love for him, that's not broken. It's still in there. Let it save you, Sarah. Let it bring you home." In the end, it wasn't a clever plan or a heroic act that saved them. It was a 70-year-old woman's stubborn, unshakable belief in the power of love to heal even the most shattered of souls. Anya Petrova dropped the detonator. She collapsed into Mona's arms, her body racked with 28 years of unshed tears. The war was finally over. Epilogue. 1 year later. The house was bigger now, with a new wing added on. The dinner table, once small and cramped, was now a long, welcoming slab of oak that could seat a dozen people. And it was always full. Julian, Matteo, and Leo were there, of course. So was Ramona, the undisputed queen of her chaotic, beautiful kingdom. But so was Anya, who, after a lenient sentence for her cooperation, now ran a foundation for at-risk youth, her fierce protective instincts finally aimed at saving lives instead of destroying them. Caleb, the young guard, was her right-hand man. Even some of the other guards, the ones who had chosen redemption over revenge, were frequent visitors. They were a patchwork family, stitched together from the wreckage of their shared past. They were loud and messy and complicated. They were proof that a family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. The choice to show up, to forgive, to heal, and to love, especially when it's hard. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the boisterous dinner table, Ramona looked at the faces surrounding her. Her boys, now men, who had learned that true strength wasn't in fighting monsters, but in refusing to become one. The woman who had been their greatest enemy, now a daughter in all but name. The young man who had chosen kindness over cruelty. She had thought, all those years ago, that she was saving 3 lost boys. She never realized they were all saving each other. That, she reflected, was the true nature of love. It wasn't a single act of sacrifice. It was 1,000 small acts of salvation, repeated every day, that slowly, miraculously, made a broken world whole again. What did you learn from this story about the kind of strength it takes to break a cycle of vengeance? About the courage to choose family when the world tells you to choose fear? Drop your truth in the comments below. And if this story moved you, make sure you subscribe, because there are so many more stories to tell. This story is dedicated to every person who has ever looked at someone the world has written off and chosen to see family. And to everyone still fighting their way back home. Remember, the question isn't whether you're strong enough to save someone else. The question is whether you're brave enough to let the people who love you save you.